When the glass shattered on the floor and the silence of the room fell a second before the laughter, Mark didn't even move. He stood beside table 7, his shirt sleeve still wet with sparkling water, while a young man with a gold watch wiped his fingers on his napkin as if he'd touched something dirty. "Watch where you're going, champ," the man said loudly, and 2 women smiled, too afraid to look at him. Mark was 49 years old, with tired shoulders and that kind of calm that only appears in those who have swallowed too much pain to waste their voice. Even so, something burned inside when the waiter asked him to get out of the way, as if the embarrassment were his. If stories like this grab you by the heart, take advantage now and sign up, because what happened that night, no one in the room could forget. He just wanted to have dinner in peace. He had chosen a table in the corner, near the dark brick wall and the amber lamps that made everything too beautiful to match the gnawing hunger he'd carried since late afternoon. He wore simple trousers, worn shoes, and an old jacket with a jammed zipper, enough clothes to be mistaken for someone who didn't belong there. Mark had accepted this mistake for years. What he no longer accepted was how certain people turned contempt into a spectacle. As he reflexively picked up the pieces, he heard the hostess whisper that perhaps it would be better to check first if he could really afford it. The phrase came out cold, slow, almost clinical, and it was at that moment that he realized they weren't just looking at his clothes. They were testing how much they could crush him without consequence. "Mark," he slowly raised his face like someone gauging the temperature of a fire before crossing it. The dining room remained full, cutlery clinking, pots hissing in the background, expensive perfume mingling with the smell of butter and seared meat. And yet everything seemed suspended around him. The young man at table 7 ordered another water, this time without looking in his direction, as if humiliating someone were a small, almost elegant habit. The manager appeared with a ready smile, but not to make amends for the abuse. He came only to reinforce, in a low, polished voice, that the establishment maintained a certain standard of atmosphere. Mark listened without interrupting, his hand closed on the inside pocket of his jacket, where he kept something that seemed to weigh more than paper. Then the kitchen door opened, and an older man rushed out, stared at Mark from a distance, and paled as if he had seen a living ghost. "Mark." It wasn't one man to create, confusion abounded. Life had already taught him that silence is often the strongest shield against ignorance. On the outside, beneath that worn jacket and shoes that had seen miles of hot asphalt, he looked like just a tired worker who had gotten the wrong address by entering a crystal hall. But inside, he carried the weight of someone who had built his own fortresses and known human wickedness firsthand. He knew the smell of arrogance even before it spoke. It was a metallic, false smell, ingrained in the gold watch and the voice of someone who thinks money buys the right to step on those who clean the floor. The contrast between Mark's restrained peace and the aggressive vanity around him made the scene suffocating. The man with the gold watch was called Jack. He didn't need to shout to be oppressive. His cruelty resided in the small details, in the way he snapped his fingers to call the waiter, in the way he never looked the person serving him in the eye. Jack was the kind of man who needed to belittle someone every day to feel even slightly important, using his family's inheritance as an invisible sledgehammer against the most vulnerable. On that cold night, he had chosen Mark as his personal entertainment. Surrounded by the complicit laughter of his companions, Jack made jokes in a deliberately loud tone, commenting on how the establishment was plummeting in quality by allowing in people who smelled like streetwalkers. Each word was a needle shot at Mark, testing the limits of a man who seemed defenseless. Anyone else would have lowered their head, apologized even though they were not guilty of anything, and gone. He slipped through the back door, his face burning with shame. But Mark remained there, absolutely still, like a rock in the middle of a hostile and cruel current. He knew that retreating would give that arrogant man exactly what he sought, confirmation of a sick superiority, while the entire room seemed to turn against him, judging him by the glaring simplicity of his attire. Mark merely breathed deeply, the calluses on his hands gripping the rough fabric of his trousers. There was an unwavering dignity in that silent man, a raw and patient strength that made those watching want to step into the scene and defend him from that injustice. He was not a fragile victim. He was a dormant volcano, choosing the right moment to awaken. The restaurant manager, a slender man in an impeccable suit and a servile demeanor towards the wealthy, finally approached Mark with calculated steps. Instead of reprimanding Jack's vexatious behavior, he bowed slightly, his face masked by a cynical and professional politeness. In a soft voice, almost whispered so as not to disturb the false nobles in the room, he suggested that Mark leave peacefully, even offering to cover the small expense of the spilled water. It was the ultimate humiliation disguised as kindness, the cowardly blow of someone who prefers to please a wealthy oppressor rather than defend an innocent. Mark looked deeply into the manager's eyes, without hatred, only with profound disappointment. The silence of the man in the jacket echoed louder than a scream, leaving the manager uncomfortably exposed in his own moral cowardice before everyone. At that very moment, the kitchen's swing door remained ajar, and the older man in the white apron continued to observe the scene in a state of utter paralysis. While the manager subtly gestured to alert the security guards at the entrance, Jack raised his glass of red wine in an ironic toast, celebrating Mark's imminent expulsion as if it were a trophy in a sadistic game. The air in the room became thick, heavy with anticipation and cowardice. The clatter of cutlery stopped. Conversations at nearby tables died down completely. Everyone expected the man in the old clothes to finally collapse, to accept the submissive place that society demanded. However, Mark didn't back down an inch, planting his feet firmly on the floor and bracing himself for the inevitable storm. The manager, impatient with Mark's silent refusal, discreetly gestured towards the main door. Immediately, the imposing figures of two security guards in dark suits began to move among the tables, cutting through the room like menacing shadows under the warm light of the chandeliers. Jack, noticing the movement, leaned back in his upholstered chair and grinned broadly, amused by the unfolding scene he himself had orchestrated. In a drawn-out, mocking voice, the man with the gold watch demanded that the intruder pay not only for the broken glass, but for the visual discomfort he was causing to the real customers. Mark felt a cold sweat on the back of his neck, but didn't look away. The sound of the security guard's heavy shoes approaching sounded like a countdown, a promise of imminent violence in an environment designed for sophistication. The injustice was beginning to take on a physical, palpable, and dangerous texture. When the security guards finally surrounded him, the air around Mark seemed to shrink, suffocating any possibility of an honorable exit. One of the men, tall and with a face fixed in an expression of professional contempt, stretched out his robust arm to grab the sleeve of Mark's worn jacket. Before the thick fingers could close on the fabric, Mark took a calculated step back, dodging the touch with an agility that surprised everyone. He didn't raise his fists, but his posture changed, revealing a muscular firmness that contrasted with the image of a defeated man. Jack let out a sharp laugh that cut through the silence of the restaurant, commenting to the neighboring table that the beggar looked like he wanted to fight, exuding that characteristic smell of cheap sweat and failure. With each passing second, the tension escalated, transforming a simple misunderstanding into a spectacle of unrestrained cruelty, where Mark's dignity was the main course. To make matters worse, the already unbearable situation, the young waiter who had initially bumped into Mark decided to intervene. Pressed by the manager's judgmental gaze and wanting to please the wealthy customer who was handing out generous tips, the young man swallowed hard and lied in front of everyone. His voice trembling, but loud enough to echo through the room. He accused the man in the jacket of deliberately trying to snatch the tray from his hands. The lie landed like a heavy stone on Mark's shoulders, adding a thick layer of slander to the class prejudice that was already overwhelming him. Mark closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, feeling the burning sensation of utter injustice rise in his throat, while the murmur of indignation from the wealthy customers grew around him. He was being buried alive under an avalanche of falsehood, and no one there seemed even remotely interested in hearing his side of the story. The manager, taking advantage of the employee's lie to justify the violent expulsion, offered Mark one last opportunity, laden with venom. With his hands clasped behind his back and his chin raised in a pose of administrative superiority, he suggested that the problem would be forgotten if Mark formally apologized to Jack and the waiter before leaving through the back. It was humiliation taken to its absolute extreme, the sadistic demand that the victim kneel before his tormentor in public. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant clinking of a glass in the kitchen. All eyes converged on Mark's scarred face, awaiting the moment of his final submission. The man in worn clothes took a deep breath, feeling the weight of each gaze piercing his skin like needles, as cold anger began to replace the patience he had maintained until that moment. As if the psychological violence wasn't enough, the woman sitting next to Jack pulled out a state-of-the-art cell phone and pointed the bright lens directly at Mark. The flash went off twice, blinding the man and adding the panic of digital exposure to the physical humiliation. She smiled slightly, adjusting the camera angle, while commenting loudly that the internet would love to see how an arrogant intruder was chased out of a luxurious setting. The threat of turning that moral massacre into an eternal viral video made Mark's stomach churn. He knew how the world worked. He knew that a lie told in high definition quickly became the only accepted truth. The fear of having his face forever stained, of being recognized on the street as an aggressive madman, tightened his chest. Cowardice now had a global audience, and Mark seemed completely cornered by his oppressors. It was then that Mark's voice finally pierced the room, hoarse, deep, and laden with an authority no one expected to hear. He ignored the cell phone pointed at his face and fixed his dark eyes directly on the manager's dilated pupils, asking if that was the despicable way they treated the people who had built the foundation of that place. The question seemed absurd, disconnected from immediate reality, provoking a murmur of general confusion among the nearby tables. The manager blinked rapidly, unsteady for a second, before regaining his composure and laughing disdainfully, treating the statement as the pathetic ramblings of a drunken or disturbed man. But something in Mark's firmness, in the absolute conviction of each syllable uttered, made the air in the restaurant even thinner. The attentive observer now perceived that there was an abyss of secrets beneath that old jacket, and that the story was far from stable. Annoyed by the unexpected resistance and the firm voice of the man who should have been crawling, Jack abruptly rose from his comfortable chair. The antagonist walked with heavy strides until he stopped inches from Mark's face, invading his personal space with a territorial and cowardly aggression. Raising his index finger adorned with a solid gold ring, Jack forcefully poked Mark in the chest, right in the center of his worn jacket. With clenched teeth and breath reeking of expensive alcohol, he whispered loudly enough for the security guards to hear, stating that he spent in one night what Mark wouldn't earn in 10 years of dirty work. The physical violation crossed the last line of what was bearable. Mark's neck muscles tensed, and his right hand, previously tucked in his pocket, began to clench into a rigid fist. The physical confrontation seemed irreversible. Before Mark could react to Jack's aggression, the more aggressive security guard lost his temper and violently shoved Mark by the shoulders. The sudden impact threw Mark off balance, causing him to crash against the solid wooden corner of the neighboring table, knocking over a glass that shattered with a sharp crash. The entire room held its breath as the man in the old jacket struggled to brace himself to avoid falling to the cold floor. In the abrupt, defensive movement, the hand that was inside his pocket was forced out, pulling with it a heavy metallic object that slid across the waxed floor, stopping exactly at the manager's feet. It wasn't a weapon, nor trash, but something that made the suited employee's eyes pop out of their sockets. While Jack laughed at his victim's imminent fall, the elderly man in the white apron finally burst through the kitchen door, running desperately towards the commotion with open arms. When the security guard took another step forward, raising his hand to grab Mark by the collar of his jacket, the scream ripped through the restaurant air with the force of a whip. Crackling. The man in the white apron, his face red and sweaty, dashed blindly across the space between the tables, trampling the manager who was still staring at the object on the floor. "Take your hands off him now!" the old man yelled, his voice trembling with a rage no one there had ever heard before. The security guard froze, his fingers inches from Mark's worn fabric, turning his face in confusion to the man in charge of the kitchen. Jack, his smile still frozen on his face, tried to maintain his arrogant pose, asking loudly what kind of circus was going on in that place. But the energy of the room had shifted brutally. The humiliation crushing Mark was about to crumble to dust. The breaking point left no room for retreat. The elderly man didn't stop until he reached Mark, completely ignoring the wealthy customers, the tense security guards, and even the manager himself, who finally bent down to pick up the metal object from the floor. With trembling hands and teary eyes, the man in the apron held Mark's shoulders, assessing if he was injured, murmuring words that sounded like a desperate plea for forgiveness. Mark, still leaning against the wooden table, released the heavy breath he had been holding since the push and placed his hand on the elderly man's shoulder, squeezing it back with the same calm he had maintained from the beginning. The silent connection between the two men destroyed any illusion that Mark was an unknown intruder. The silence of the room became absolute, punctuated only by the cook's panting breath, while the mind of each person present tried to piece together a puzzle that had just been turned upside down. The manager stood slowly, holding the heavy object that had fallen from Mark's pocket with the reverence of someone holding a bomb about to explode. It was an old bunch of keys, attached to a heavy cast bronze key ring bearing the restaurant's original emblem, an item possessed only by the founders of that luxury chain. The manager's face lost its color, the mask of cynical politeness melting into pure professional terror as he looked from the key ring to Mark's simple clothes. Jack, not understanding the weight of that sudden silence, snapped his fingers again at the old man and demanded that this charade end immediately, threatening to call the police. It was then that Mark straightened, adjusted the collar of his jacket with calculated slowness, and turned to the man with the gold watch, his dark eyes gleaming with a lethal intensity. The hour of submission was over. "There won't be any police today, Jack." Mark's voice echoed sharp and polished, devoid of any tremor or submission. He didn't need to shout. The density of those words was enough to break the last layer of arrogance on the face of the man with the gold watch. The elderly man in the apron, the chef who had run the kitchen for almost 3 decades, stepped forward, his hands still trembling, and finally uttered what everyone feared to hear. He called Mark by his last name, with the reverential respect reserved only for someone who not only pays the salaries, but who built every brick of the empire that surrounded him. The nervous murmur ran through the tables like an invisible electric current, making cutlery fall and breaths freeze in the chests of those who had laughed at the humiliated man. The worn jacket and dusty shoes were not a sign of failure. They were the perfect disguise for someone who needed to see firsthand how his work was rotting from the inside. The manager's silence became suffocating. His eyes glazed over at the bronze keychain he still held, like a confession of guilt. He tried to articulate a rehearsed excuse, stammering about misunderstandings and security protocols, but Mark raised only his left hand, stopping his words in mid-air before they could be uttered. "Got dirty," The atmosphere was more. Mark walked slowly to Jack's table, his imposing figure now undeniable, and looked into the eyes of the man who minutes before had tried to crush his dignity. "You've talked a lot about money tonight," Mark began, his voice low, lethal, and perfectly controlled. He explained that the expensive watch, the sharp clothes, and the full wallet could buy the most expensive dishes on the menu, but they didn't buy the right to steal anyone's humanity inside his house. The antagonist instinctively recoiled in his chair, the mocking smile replaced by a pathetic expression of understanding and fear. The bill for arrogance had arrived at the wrong table. The woman next to Jack, the same one who had been laughing while filming the humiliation with her state-of-the-art cell phone, quickly put the device down, her face pale as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Mark didn't ask her to delete the video. On the contrary, with a look that mixed contempt and a strange pity, he said she could post it. After all, the whole city deserved to see who the cowards were who needed to humiliate workers to feel important at a Friday dinner. The phrase hit the table like a moral execution sentence, and the couple realized that the public shame they had tried to inflict on him would now be their own digital legacy. Without saying another word to the oppressive customer, Mark turned to the young waiter who had lied about the tray, the boy who was now trembling, unable to lift his eyes from the waxed floor. The truth, when it appears, it has the force of a hurricane in a closed room. Mark. He didn't humiliate the waiter. He didn't need to. He simply looked him up and down, recognizing in the young man's frightened face the same weakness that had tainted the manager. The choice to sacrifice the truth to please those with more power. In a firm voice, Mark instructed the chef to organize the kitchen and announced, loudly enough for the entire dining room to hear, that the manager and the 2 security guards were fired at that very moment, without prior notice and without the right to any justification. The manager let the keychain slip from his fingers, the metallic sound against the wood sealing the end of a career built on flattery and cowardice. The cleanup needed to start at the top, removing the rot that allowed customers like Jack to feel like they owned other people's lives. The entire restaurant watched, paralyzed, as a small empire of arrogance crumbled before the man in the worn jacket. For Jack, the ultimate punishment didn't come through shouting or physical violence, but with the cold, utter humiliation of indifference. Mark signaled to the chef and demanded that Table 7's bill be settled immediately, refusing any payment from the wealthy man. "Dinner's on me," said the owner, turning his back on the antagonist, who now seemed tiny in his upholstered chair. "But you'll never set foot in any of my restaurants again. We don't tolerate misery in this establishment." The elegant expulsion, witnessed by every bystander who had previously laughed at the scorn, was the coup de grace. Jack stood trembling, gathering his expensive jacket and walking towards the exit, under the heavy, silent gaze of dozens of people who now judged him. The oppressor had been swallowed by his own arrogance, leaving through the front door carrying a shame that no amount of money in the world could wash away. Jack's departure didn't bring back the lively chatter of before, but rather a different kind of silence, tinged with relief and reflection. Those who minutes before had been complicit through laughter or inaction now looked at their own plates, processing the brutality of what they had witnessed and the weight of the justice that had been served coldly. Mark didn't return to his corner table. He watched as the chef escorted the former manager to the back door, the bronze keyring retrieved and put back in the inside pocket of his old jacket, where it had always belonged. The restaurant, which hours before had seemed a stage for the arrogance of a few, had finally recovered its soul. The ostentation of expensive clothes and watches had been crushed by the decency of a man who knew that the true value of a place lies not in the price of the menu, but in the respect for those who make it work. Before crossing the kitchen doors to personally take charge of that evening, Mark stopped in the center of the room and looked around, his shoulders still tired, but his posture unwavering, like someone who had weathered the storm without raising his fists. He nodded slightly to the young waiter, who was now beginning to clean the floor with hands trembling with gratitude, and took a deep breath, feeling the smell of butter and seared meat once again fill the air. The story of that quiet man, who accepted humiliation until injustice tried to devour the dignity of his people, would echo for a long time within those dark brick walls. No one there would forget the silent lesson that true strength never shouts. It only awaits the exact moment to show its face, proving that not every crown shines and not every king wears gold. This story isn't just about what happened inside a luxury restaurant, but about how our silence can be the most deafening response against those who try to diminish us. The true greatness of a human being has never been tied to the label of their clothes, but to the firmness of their character in moments when the world tries to make them kneel. If you felt the weight of this turnaround, if the cold justice also cleansed your soul, don't leave here without leaving your mark. Subscribe to the channel right now, activate notifications, and become part of those who understand that respect is the only currency that truly matters. Comment below what you would do in Mark's place and share this video with those who need to remember that arrogance always ends up tripping over its own feet. If you've ever been through something similar or know someone who has, leave a like and tell me in the comments how it went. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. Thanks for watching.